Yashodanandana Brajajanaranja Yashodanandana Brajajanaranja Chamunajira Vanachari Chamunajira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Vallabha Girivardhari Gopi Vallabha Yashodanandana Brajajanaranja Yashodanandana Brajajanaranja Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama 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 Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare Rama Hari Bol Hari Bol Hari Bol Tagore Hari Bol Tagore Hari Bol Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Jaya Jaya Prabhupada Prabhupada Srila Prabhupada ki
Jai.
Shri Shikodaritai Maipo Shashi ki
Jai.
Shri Tulsinath Maharaj ki
Jai.
Shri Giridhar Rao ki
Jai.
Shri Nrsimha Bhagavan ki
Jai.
Grantra Srimad Bhagavatam ki
Jai.
Nitai Gaura Premanandi.
Hare
Hare Krishna. So reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita, chant Hare Krishna and fight. Srila Prabhupada wanted to travel with a group of his disciples by train to Allahabad, but when a devotee went to buy tickets, he discovered that all seats had long been purchased. There was no chance of making reservations for Allahabad, so close to Kumbh Mela. One of Srila Prabhupada's Bombay friends, however, Mr. Gupta, held a high position with the Central Railway of India, and at Prabhupada's request arranged for a special private car on a train to Allahabad, exclusively for Prabhupada and his disciples. Early on the morning of January the 11th, Srila Prabhupada embarked on the 24-hour-plus train ride from Bombay to Allahabad. He was sharing his first-class compartment with Rameshwara Swami, Jagadish and Hari Shori, and even as the train pulled out of the station, Prabhupada was preaching. Rameshwara mentioned the radio show he had recently been on in California, where a Lutheran minister had said Krishna was a sex symbol because he had so many wives and gopis. Even taking it that Krishna is after sex, said Prabhupada, and if sex is bad, why are they after sex? He says that sex is not for God, Rameshwara replied. Srila Prabhupada was sitting on one side of the compartment, and his disciples sat facing him. The loud rattling of the train cars on the rails made conversation sometimes difficult. If sex is not there in God, said Prabhupada, then how has it come? God created everything, so God did not create sex? Srila Prabhupada explained that sex exists both in the material world and in the spiritual. Material sex enjoyment being a perversion of the original pure sex that exists in the Supreme. Christian sexual enjoyment, therefore, is not at all like material success. It's not at all like material sex. It is the exact opposite. In fact, inasmuch as the reality is the opposite of its reflection. You do not understand how to face the opposing party, said Srila Prabhupada. He was in an animated, argumentative mood, enthusiastic to show his disciples how to defeat the opposition. He had sometimes described his own spiritual master as singer Lion Guru, and they now saw him in a similar fighting spirit. The more opposition there will be, he said, the more we have to defend. Srila Prabhupada Rameshwara asked, should we be thinking in our minds that one day the Krishna conscious movement will have to manage the cities and the nations of the world? Oh yes, Prabhupada replied. Rameshwara asked how the devotees could accomplish such a huge ambitious project. The management would be simplified, Prabhupada explained, since the citizens would live a pure natural life, lest the burdensome sinful aspects of godless government would become unnecessary and so many complex problems would be solved. He gave the example of self-sufficient agrarian communities where men earned their livelihood locally, but only by education and by experiencing the higher taste of Krishna-conscious pleasure, he said, could the masses become satisfied with simple living. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 12, chapter entitled Rahugana Converses with Javat, Text 3. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Prakshyami Paschad Aduna Subodham. Prakshyami Paschad Aduna Subodham. Prakshyami Paschad Aduna Subodham. Adhyatma Yoga Ratitam Tavoktam. Adhyatma Yoga Gratitam Tavoktam. Adhyatma Yoga Gratitam Tavoktam. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me. Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Prakshyami Paschad Adana Subodham. Adhyatma Yoga Gratitam Tavoktam. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me. Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Prakshyami Paschad Adana Subodham. Adhyatma Yoga Gratitam Tavoktam. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me.
Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Prakshyami Paschad Aduna Subodham. Adhyatma Yoga Gratitam Tavoktam. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me.
Tasmad Bhavantam Mama Sanshayaratam. Prakshyami Paschad Adana Subodham. Adhyatma Yoga Gratitam Tavoktam. Akyahi Kotuhala Chetaso Me. Tasmat, therefore, Bhavantam, to you, Mama, of me, Sanshayaratam, the subject matter that is not clear to me, Prakshyami, I shall submit, Paschat, afterwards, Aduna, now, Subodham, so that it can be clearly understood. Adhyatma Yoga, of mystic instruction for self-realization. Ratitam,
Ratitam,
as composed,
as composed,
Tava,
Tava,
your,
your,
Uktam,
Uktam,
speech,
speech.
Akyahi.
Akyahi,
Please explain again.
please explain again.
Kautuhala Chetasa,
Kautuhala Chetasa,
whose mind is very inquisitive
His mind is very inquisitive
to understand the mystery of such statements,
to
to understand the
mystery
mystery of
of
such
such
statements.
may
May
to me.
to me.
Translation. Whatever doubts I have about a particular subject matter, I shall ask you about later. For the time being, these mysterious yoga instructions you have given me for self-realization appear very difficult to understand. Please repeat them in a simple way so that I can understand them. My mind is very inquisitive and I want to understand this clearly. Please repeat. Whatever doubts I have about a particular subject matter,
Whatever doubts you have about a particular subject matter,
I shall ask you about later.
I shall ask you about later.
For the time being,
For the time being,
these mysterious yoga instructions you have given me
these mysterious yoga
instructions you have given me
for self-realization
for self-realization
appear very difficult to understand.
appear very difficult to understand.
Please repeat them in a simple way
Please repeat them in a simple way
so that I can understand them.
so that I can understand.
My mind is very inquisitive
My mind is very inquisitive
and I want to understand this clearly.
and I want to understand this clearly.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada ki.
Jai.
The Vedic literature instructs Tasmad Gurum Prapadyeta Jigyasu Shreya Uttamam. An intelligent man must be very inquisitive to know the transcendental science deeply. Therefore one must approach a guru, a spiritual master. Although Javat explained everything to Maharaja Rugana, it appears that his intelligence was not perfect enough to understand clearly. He therefore requested a further explanation. As stated in Bhagavad Gita 4.34, Tadvidi pranipatena pariprashnena sevaya. The student must approach a spiritual master and surrender unto him fully. Pranipatena. He must also question him in order to understand his instructions. Pariprashnena. One should not only surrender to the spiritual master, but also render loving service unto him, sevaya, so that the spiritual master will be pleased with the student and explain the transcendental subject matter more clearly. A challenging spirit before the spiritual master should be avoided if one is at all interested in learning the Vedic instructions in depth. Omagyanā timirandasya Yanandana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayamrupagadamayan Dadati Swavatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Tapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadhvaitam Savadutam Varijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shivashakam Vitam Shah Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapti Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vishavana Sita Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchikalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Sridhar Sari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Srila Prabhupada says, an intelligent man must be very inquisitive to know the transcendental science deeply. And yet, at the same time, an intelligent man must be very patient. That even though an intelligent man must approach a guru, he shouldn't expect that all of the transcendental science will be revealed to him very quickly. We were discussing a few days ago about the influence of a pure devotee on the audience, and also not just on the audience, but even on the persons who happen to be in that environment at the time that the spiritual master is giving instruction, that everyone is benefited by the association of a self-realized spiritual master. And a sincere disciple, has this faith that by staying close to the spiritual master, and by following the instructions of the spiritual master, then he will be benefited. He will be making progress in the path of understanding the transcendental science. And Srila Prabhupada many times makes this clear, that by acting to please the spiritual master, by following the spiritual master's instructions to the best of one's ability, then one is being benefited, one is making progress, and also one is pleasing Krishna. This is irrespective of how the spiritual master externally may react or interact with the disciple. The spiritual master may have very little physical interaction with the disciple, and sometimes even when that physical interaction is there, it's not necessarily the case that the spiritual master will spend a lot of time answering the disciples' questions. The spiritual master may have other duties and other responsibilities to other disciples. But the disciple always feels fortunate to have the opportunity to attempt to please the spiritual master by following his instructions. He has faith that connection in itself will bring about clarity in one's spiritual life. The disciple will always feel that there's an opportunity to make progress. So I was looking at some of Srila Prabhupada's letters to his disciples to encourage them. Disciples perhaps who very, very rarely saw him, they weren't devotees that were in perhaps positions of responsibility where they often saw Srila Prabhupada. But Srila Prabhupada was giving them encouragement. So Srila Prabhupada in August 1974, received various offerings of Vyasa Puja. Many of his disciples from around the world wrote to Srila Prabhupada expressing their appreciation of him and thanking him. And Srila Prabhupada replied in a letter to many of them. And so he says, I beg to thank you for your kind appreciations on the Vyasa Puja day. Your sentiments are appreciated by me. It is stated by Vishwanath Chakrabarti Thakur that it is only by pleasing the spiritual master that one can be assured of pleasing Krishna. So my only request to my disciples all over the world on this day is to go on pushing on this movement with determination and sincerity, rigidly following the principles I have given you. If we're rigidly following the principles that Srila Prabhupada has given us, or that our spiritual master, Srila Prabhupada trained his disciples on the qualifications required for becoming a spiritual master, and here he's stating it in a way that's very simple, that our spiritual master is giving us instructions, some of which are coming down through the succession, through the Shastra, through the Guru Parampara, and specifically in the way that Srila Prabhupada took the teachings of the Shastras and the previous Acharyas and translated them into a way that could be followed throughout the world. And so he created certain standards of what was required for initiation and what was required for initiated devotees to practice throughout their lives, so that whatever situation we may be in terms of our service, or in terms of our health, or in terms of our ashram, or in terms of our occupation, then there are certain regulations and rules which we can understand that if we can really very, very carefully try to increase the quality of the way that we follow these rules and regulations, then this will be pleasing to Srila Prabhupada and pleasing to our spiritual master, pleasing to Krishna, pleasing to the authorities. So Srila Prabhupada, by giving us these four regulative principles, no meat eating, no gambling, no illicit sex, and no intoxication, he was really taking the instructions of the Shastra and of the Guru Parampara and presenting them in a very simple way that could be followed, that could be passed on generation after generation. But it's not that we just follow them by rote, but we should understand that these are ways in which we can increase our cleanliness, increase our austerity, increase our compassion, and increase our truthfulness. So that basically these trying to be more truthful, so in truthful we can be introspective. To what degree am I really trying to please my spiritual master? So how do I do that? By reading his instructions, reading his books, and studying his life, really understanding what he wants from his disciples. So this is being truthful. It's not that I'm just following the minimum. And then similarly in cleanliness, how can I organize my life in such a way that if my spiritual master was here now, he would actually be very pleased by my endeavors to be clean. And in terms of austerity, how can I organize my life that simplicity is there? Simplicity means that we can adapt to changing situations without very much clutter inhibiting the change. So we're not attached to a particular situation or a particular comfort or a particular conception that ties us down, that makes it difficult for us to change. And compassion, so like no meat eating, no eating fish, no eating meat, fish or eggs. This is kind of like the minimum. But compassion means developing an understanding that all living entities are the residences of the Supersoul. All living entities are the eternal children of Krishna. Just Krishna says he's the seed-giving father of all living entities. So how can we understand what is best, for all living entities? They're all eternal children of Krishna. How can we reconnect them? And so this is true compassion. To be able to do all of those things and to gradually increase the quality of these four principles of Vaishnava life, then it requires honesty on our part, and part of that honesty, it's part of that self-realization, part of that honesty will be realizing that in many areas we're failing. So therefore Srila Prabhupada wanted us to not just adhere to his instructions, but to also associate with devotees who were living in the same communities with, and learn from them. Some devotees will have particular strengths, so we can learn from them. How can we increase the quality of our service to our spiritual master? And even if we have a different spiritual master, still they're all giving these principles. They're all giving these four regulative principles, which are based on increasing the quality of our compassion, our truthfulness, our cleanliness, and our austerity. So we can we can discuss how we can do that, and we can understand that this will be pleasing to our spiritual master. So I was thinking that devotees who've grown up in backgrounds where they had a lot of respect for their family, for their parents, and where their parents were perhaps quite strict with them, but strict for the right reason, to protect them from bad association and to give them a sense of having respect for others, to give them a sense of being prepared to work hard. So people who've had that kind of upbringing, not necessarily with their parents, perhaps it was with their elder siblings or with their teachers at school. So those persons, in one sense, they have a great advantage in surrendering to a spiritual master, because they already kind of understand the dynamic of the servant and the master. And unfortunately, or perhaps not necessarily unfortunately, but it's the condition of what's so-called modern society, global society. It's not really Western society anymore, because it's the whole of the planet really is that society, is that very few people actually have that kind of good fortune, and for many people, myself included, and it's quite difficult to actually see oneself in that role as servant. And Srila Prabhupada perceived that when he first came to New York in 1965. For the first year, he had very few followers, and he said that he spent a whole year observing the lifestyle of the New York people and of the American people as a whole, and understanding their psychology. And he understood that there needed to be a very deep purification of the heart to be able to accommodate this mood of being the humble servant. So And he was extremely pleased when he found that people were attracted to the chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. He could see how this chanting, and especially the congregational chanting in Kirtan and Harinam, how this actually helped people to perceive their consciousness being changed. So this is also another, although it's not one of the four regular principles, but at the time of initiation, we also vow to chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra 16 times 108 on the beats, 1,728 times daily. And Srila Prabhupada, throughout his teachings and instructions to his disciples, on several occasions he said this is the most important instruction, is to always chant 16 rounds daily. And on several occasions he clarified that this doesn't just mean mechanical chanting, but it means learning how to chant in a mood of devotion, with deep concentration, and always endeavouring to give up the 10 offences. So again, this is an instruction that's there for all disciples of all spiritual masters in the Gaudiya Vaishnava Sampradaya, and specifically in ISKCON, and therefore again we can assist each other in this practice of chanting Hare Krishna very attentively, and always trying to do so in the association of devotees, and always, if possible, to attend perhaps some japa seminars or workshops or sanghas where we're trying to increase the quality of our chanting and understand how we can develop a taste for the chanting. Here in this verse, Srila Prabhupada says, an intelligent man must be very inquisitive to know the transcendental science deeply. So, this is we're very fortunate that so many devotees are now taking time to help us understand how we can chant the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra deeply and understand the deep transcendental science of understanding the chanting of Hare Krishna. So, so there's a lot of. So we've inherited this wonderful dynamic of this relationship between the sincere disciple and the sincere spiritual master. However, we've also inherited Srila Prabhupada's mood, as we were hearing there from Rameshwar asked the question in Srila Prabhupada Lila Rita, are you expecting that in the future we'll be able to lead the world? So we've also inherited that, and that Srila Prabhupada is also asking his disciples and grand disciples, everyone in ISKCON basically, to take on this burden, you could say, this burden of this mission of giving Krishna consciousness to everyone in the world. So it's certainly a very inconceivably difficult task. Not inconceivably difficult. It's not inconceivably difficult. It's obviously difficult. But we should understand that it will never become easier. It will never become easier by neglecting the instructions of our spiritual master. Even if it seems like there's a great opportunity, perhaps, to make inroads into a particular area of political or economic or environmental life, if that kind of endeavour in some way jeopardizes our relationship with our spiritual master, then nothing good can come of it. Something good may appear to come of it in the short term, but actually it will sow the seeds of corruption, or sow the seeds of pride, and it will do so perhaps in a very subtle way that may not be immediately obvious. So better that we try to devote our time and energy to associate with those devotees who are trying very hard to please their spiritual master. And in this way we'll become part of Srila Prabhupada's very powerful spiritual family, which by its very nature will give association to all of the people of the world, and by that nature gradually all of the people of the world will actually benefit both materially and spiritually. Actually, so I was looking also into another quote that I looked up among Srila Prabhupada's instructions, which kind of really stresses this point, is that Srila Prabhupada says in a letter to Satsvarup Das Goswami in 1967. So he's referring to a devotee who's kind of strayed away from following the instructions of the spiritual master in the name of trying to do some like powerful preaching. And so Srila Prabhupada says, you sing every day, and you sing every morning that by the mercy of the spiritual master one can please the Lord. And one who has not pleased the spiritual master cannot have any access in the realm of Krishna consciousness. Very recently, a disciple has developed a different consciousness of Maya, which is called misuse of one's minute independence offered by Krishna. By misuse of one's independence, one at once becomes a victim of Maya, and thus he loses all importance in Krishna consciousness. So it is my definite opinion that his lectures anywhere now will bear no spiritual sequence. So we don't need to say who it is. But Srila Prabhupada is saying is if we're not constantly endeavouring to please the spiritual master by improving the quality of our service to the spiritual master, then that means we're becoming infected by Maya, and that whatever we do will actually become useless. So it's very simple, as I say. Srila Prabhupada was very pleased with disciples who just tried their very best to please him in a simple way. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments? Top Shri Krishna Prabhu.
One was, how do we were saying we perceive the consciousness being changed. So I thought that was interesting, because we are the consciousness, and at the same time we can perceive the consciousness. So how do we perceive consciousness? Do we have to reflect it first on the mirror of the mind?
Well, it's sort of a bit like Srila Prabhupada often gives the example of, that if you've got the hand in the glove, a hand is able to perform very many delicate tasks. But if we put a glove on, and although it appears to be able to perform similar tasks, it's less agile. And the bigger the gloves, the more the mittens are, and the less we'll be able to perform those tasks. So if you're trying to do something very delicate with a couple of huge mittens on, and someone comes along and says, "You're wasting your time, let me take them off," then you'll perceive that your attempts or your ability or your desire to do the right thing is being assisted by that person who's removing the coverings. So similarly, devotees were able to perceive, and Srila Prabhupada could see how the coverings were being removed by devotees engaging in chanting Hare Krishna together. Because especially in New York and San Francisco in the early days, in 1966, 67, 68, then many of the people who were coming to Haight-Ashbury and Greenwich Village, they were like covered by many layers of intoxication and like all sorts of like psychological misconceptions and conditioning. And they just weren't able to hear the philosophy. And many of them were very proud and wanted to dance in their own way and didn't want to sit down. But still, Srila Prabhupada saw that if these people just kept coming every week and taking part in the chanting, he could see the change in them physically, and he could also see the change in the sense that they were giving up their pride and they were more inclined to take a humble kind of position and listen. So he could see it, and also obviously the persons themselves could perceive it as well. Although some of often the way that they reacted to that change in consciousness it was too like shocking for them, that they were felt threatened, that they were giving up that mood of independence. So many of them didn't stay. But those who did stay, in quite a short space of time, they became capable of following instructions, spiritual instructions, and practicing the four regulative principles. And then within a couple of years, then they were like advanced devotees, able to teach others and able to understand the elevated teachings of the Srimad Bhagavatam.
I was going to make a comment as well. She said I thought you could make a comment as well, and it was just that you were saying we have to be determined and patient to develop a taste for the holy name. So somebody may have been chanting for a long time and not be experiencing a taste, or that he perceives as a taste for the holy name. And then somebody else that's taking up the chanting may think, well, he's been doing it for longer than I've got left to chant, and he doesn't seem to have got there. So then the other person could become discouraged. But I was thinking, because it's a personal relationship between Krishna and the living entity, then Krishna brings the living entity to Krishna consciousness at an opportune moment, sometimes earlier in life, sometimes later in life, and he knows how much time the entity's got left before he'll be leaving this world. And so it's between him and Krishna. So somebody seems to be getting over a long period of time, and somebody starts late, and then Krishna just, he can control the speed as he wants, as he sees it's necessary according to the particular time and circumstance. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
As far as I understand your question.
So that's what your question was about.
Okay.
An observation really was, I think you could add some light to the observation.
Well, one thing I was reading, I looked at who was Srila Prabhupada's favourite disciples, and this is not like an absolute statement, but one it was actually Tamal Krishna Goswami. In his opinion, Srila Prabhupada's two favourite disciples were Jayananda and Madhudrisha. Madhudrisha passed away in 1974. Jayananda passed away in 1977. Oh no, Madhudrisha passed away in 2004. So neither of these devotees are with us now. But Srila Prabhupada said about Jayananda that he made the comment to Tamal Krishna that when he heard that initially, before he heard how Jayananda Prabhu left his body, Srila Prabhupada said that Jayananda would probably go to the heavenly planets and live there for like 100 lifetimes and then come back and perfect his life and then go back to Godhead. But when Srila Prabhupada heard how Jayananda left his body in the last few days, that he was like even though he was in so much physical pain, that he was determined to chant. And Srila Prabhupada said he would go back to Godhead. And Srila Prabhupada said, I'm very pleased to have such a good disciple. And then Srila Prabhupada actually said that from now on we should always celebrate the disappearance day of Jayananda just as we do of our previous acharyas. So it's interesting. I mean, Jayananda was already one of Srila Prabhupada's favourite disciples. It wasn't just because of that. So the fact that Srila Prabhupada said that he was going to the heavenly planets, to me that indicates that Srila Prabhupada is not. It's a very, very rare thing for a devotee to actually go back to the spiritual world, or even to go to a place where Krishna is performing his eternal pastimes and then go back to the spiritual world in the next life. But the thing that Srila Prabhupada was really most strong about was to establish this relationship with the spiritual master, to establish this strong relationship with the master and the servant, and this real loyal mood of trying to please the spiritual master. And it's not based on results. So I feel this is really important, that to somehow in our communities and in our association and amongst our friends and amongst our superiors in Krishna consciousness, in our Krishna conscious communities, that we try to help each other develop this mood of serving the Vaishnavas. And part of serving the Vaishnavas is helping them in their japa. And as you say, only Krishna knows when anyone is going back to the spiritual world. But as long as we remain part of this family of Gaudiya Vaishnavas, then it doesn't really matter when we're going back, because that relationship is what people are looking for. People are looking for that sweet relationship between master and servant, friend and friend. So however long we stay in the material world, as long as we have that desire to want to please Srila Prabhupada's family, please our spiritual master, then we don't need to fear. We don't need to fear. And so maybe that's my reflection on your question.
Purujan went to a devotee. I think he went to devotee. He was going to say, I'm going to tell you two things now which will change your life forever. And he said, what's that? He said, Krishna is unlimitedly powerful and unlimitedly merciful.
Pancha Srimad Bhagavatam ki,
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Shri Krishna Chaitanya Krishna ki, Jai Gaur Premanandi.
Hari Bol. His very Vasi ki.
Namaste Vaishnava ki Jai.
Yeah.